we're back with another episode of the Actual Fluency podcast, and today I've got the CEO of Memrise, who's also a master of memory, and we're here to talk about the Membus project, Memrise, and the memory, of course. I mean, how could we not? Ed Cooke, how are you doing today?
I'm doing extremely well. Thank you very much for having me on the show.
Fantastic. And you know, this Membus project has obviously been the talk of the town the last few weeks. Can you just give the listeners who haven't heard about it yet a brief summary of what the project is?
So, well, the Membus to begin with it's a double-decker bus, which we have got our hands on and painted in sort of marvelous colors and so on. And the Membus project, it relates to a learning experience we've been developing, which is based on very short videos of native speakers using language in context. So, you know, obviously with language learning, the reason you want to be able to speak language is because you wish to be able to, you know, communicate and encounter people and learn about the culture and basically open up the horizons of your world. That's what we kind of think of as the essential quality of language learning. And the Membus, and so the video learning experience is basically to say, rather than learning from phrases or from written down text, as you know, most language apps and books obviously operate, why not actually have, as an essential part of the language learning, an encounter with native speakers using language in context? And this has many charms. Some are practical and some are aesthetic. You know, when you're learning from short video native speakers, you're actually kind of meeting people who speak the language. You're seeing their clothes, their humor, their physiognomy, how they behave. You know, it's something of their humor. And actually encountering real people in some sense. And then, you know, practically also kind of encountering how the language is actually spoken, how different accents work, how well, you're actually just encountering real language. And so it's got these kind of two rather marvelous benefits, this kind of mode of learning, that you're learning real language and you're also in direct contact with the reasons that you'd wish to speak a language in the first place. So that's the kind of the video experience. So we were kind of in a situation where we're like, okay, well, this is super cool. We've done it for English to some extent. But how can we go out and collect, you know, what's required for kind of learning language? Tens of thousands of videos of words and phrases being used in context. And so it's quite a long story, but you know, we experimented around, running around with filming cameras and talking to people and so on. And we found that there's this rather wonderful methodology where you get a kind of bunch of people, 5 or so filmmakers. You hit a town and you just accost pedestrians. You say, excuse me, like, we're making this video dictionary. Would you mind contributing a phrase? And it turns out you can actually record an enormous number of these phrases, but also to a really high quality. You can shoot them beautifully, you can have super great audio, and the rest of it. And so you know, on the basis of this methodology, we're sort of thinking, okay, we need to go around Europe and like collect loads and loads of languages. Well, what is the most effective and also, let's face it, fun way of doing that? And so we decided that the way of doing that is to go on a kind of on a road trip. And so, yeah, we picked up this double-decker bus, painted it with Membus on the side and all these cool Memrise graphics. And next summer, we're going to go on a kind of epic, and I'll come back to why epic is the word for it, but an epic road trip around Europe to basically hit all the towns and countries of Europe and collect tens of thousands of videos of native speakers in context, which will then pipe into the Memrise app to create a kind of a learning experience which we hope will be basically of unparalleled joyfulness.
Fantastic. And obviously people can get involved as well. We should probably get that in
yes.
quickly,
So
people know where to go.
Yeah, so we are currently running a Kickstarter, which is part of, you know, it's both to kind of partly fund the project, but also to gather a community behind it. And so, you know, if you just search Google for Membus, it will come up, the project will come up, and as will the page on memrise.com. And there, you know, we're looking for volunteer filmmakers. We're looking for people who wish to meet us along the way, introduce us to their friends, just have some fun and meet us. Yeah, so we're looking for anybody who's kind of inspired by this project to help. And you know, and I will say that through the Kickstarter, we've had some wonderful, you know, wonderful incoming interest. You know, people who are like, well, you know, I'm currently, you know, recording video testimony of people in Africa and northern Iraq. this sounds like a great project, I'd love to get involved, and so on and so forth. So all volunteers welcome, and anyone who wants to meet us along the way, maybe record some of their own language with us, or otherwise help out, would be fantastic to meet.
Sounds good. And there's just a few days left to contribute to that Kickstarter. So if people are interested,
yeah,
get going and get on that Kickstarter. There are lots of different levels you can contribute, all the way from getting some Memrise swag, or you can go all the way up and sponsor a wheel, which is very exciting. And depending on what kind of budgets people have, there are lots of different levels. So go check it out if you haven't done so already. All right. So on the basis of that, I just had a few questions about the biology you're talking about. Has there been any kind of link between, or have you aware of any kind of benefit memory of watching somebody speak a phrase instead of just listening to someone speak a phrase? Does it help us memorize it better?
Well, I suppose I think it does. I don't know if that is the principal benefit, and I think that that it's important. I mean, one of the things about memory is that it's quite a complex cognitive function. So it's not just a kind of storehouse in the center of your mind, but rather it interacts with all of your other kind of faculties. So for instance, perception, you learn to perceive things, you learn to understand an accent or something, and that learning is itself memory, but we don't often call it that. And so there are huge kind of the valuable things for the language learner which takes place when you learn from video, which wouldn't necessarily fall into the category of, oh, I can remember this word better, but you remember the word more like it actually is, and you remember more of the subtle fringe features of what someone's actually saying and speaking. And the second thing is that, the context of language usage, well, I mean, just as generally as a feature of memory, the context of recall is most effective when it's, our facility at recalling something is closely related to the connection between the situation we're in when we're trying to recall and that in which we learn something. So there are kind of lots of famous studies where, if you smell marmalade while you're studying maths, and then you smell marmalade when you're doing a maths exam, you'll do better at that. And it can link to anything. If you're in the space, people perform better in exams if they do the exam in the same space they studied. One rather comic experiment involved scuba divers learning to solve maths problems and remember things, and it found that if you learn something while scuba diving, you recall it better when scuba diving than when you're back on dry land, and vice versa.
Wow.
So these kind of context effects are enormously important, and obviously the vast majority of the time when you're actually speaking a language, you're face to face with somebody. You're actually seeing someone, including their face and their intonation and the fact that they perhaps speak quite fast and have facial expressions and so on. So that, I think, is another advantage. It may be that there's no massive improvement in how fast you remember the word, but that you can recall it much easily when you actually need to, and that you remember more richness and so on and so forth.
Right. So okay. So and also, I suppose it's a general improvement of the learning process also, because it's more enjoyable to actually see people, and from the demos I've seen, people are quite smiling and they're quite happy to share their knowledge.
Yeah, I mean, I think for us, we've always wanted to develop a learning experience which is authentically joyful. So where, you can imagine, even if you're really tired after a long day and you normally sort of, watch Netflix and whatever, where there's just a kind of a flow to it and a pleasure and a kind of encounter with things which are beautiful and vibrant and fun. We've always wanted to create something like that, which is also like brutally effective for learning. So where you can like learn at an incredible pace. And we think there's a really interesting path with this video, because it's just so enjoyable to see people's faces, and it's quite, I'd like to reflect on the fact that if you look at different nationalities, and so far we've just done little trial projects on Danish people and French people and so on. One of the things which strikes you is like, oh my God, the Danish people are so Danish, and French people are so French, and equally like English people are so English. And it's that kind of encounter with like the reality of the people, which is, I think, part of the joy of the learning experience, and something which we really want to develop and turn into a kind of authentically rich form of learning experience.
Right. I talked to Marie a little bit about the project as well.
Uh-huh.
She's heading the project, and
Mhm.
one of the questions I had was about the accents, because initially when I thought about recording something in English, I was
Mhm.
thinking, well, does it help somebody in, let's say, Brazil to
Mhm.
learn English from somebody in Glasgow?
Uh-huh.
And I initially saw it as kind of a weakness in that you had to have kind of a high language standard in the sense of like high German or
Mhm.
high English. But Marie was kind of saying that it's probably, beneficial as well to show the diversity. What
Mhm.
do you think about, having a wide range of accents? Would it be helpful for learners of English, or let's say all languages, or do you have to kind of take some steps to make it a little bit more like the high standard version of the language?
Accessible, yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I think it's a little bit of both. So I think that in terms of like the robustness of your comprehension and the depth of your language skill, having that facility of understanding lots of different accents and also lots of different voices, and actual human voices, quite often
Sure.
on language learning programs, you get a kind of robot voice which says everything, they kind of a slightly kind of tinny version of a perfect form of the language. So I think, generally speaking, it's very healthy. I think that the dream of the video project in the long term is that one will be able to kind of select one's accent, just like, okay, I
Oh.
want to learn like Texan English or English from Oxfordshire or English from Scotland or whatever, and it could be amazingly specific. I want to be able to speak like the Beatles. I'm going to learn English from Liverpool, or what have you. But that's probably a little bit down the line. And I think, we because we have wonderful data on the degree to which people are correctly understanding the videos, we're able very quickly to say, okay, well, this person's accent's a bit thick. We're gonna whatever. Um,
That's pretty funny. You can just see it based on the test results that
Yeah, it's it's
uh,
it's astonishing actually. It's so cool what's possible with kind of information technology. Because on Memrise, people might learn the word for spoon in French, 500,000 times a year or something, and so you get incredibly precise data about what the
yeah.
best way to learn the word for food is, etc., etc. So,
and
um,
and you use that data to improve the sort of the site, I suppose, the service.
yeah, so that's the idea. I mean, of course, these things are always slightly more complex in reality than in than in one's imagination. But that's like emphatically something we're going to be able to do with the video stuff. Um, and I mean, it's interesting. I think we have some really exciting product ideas around optimizing about using the data for kind of at a very fine-grained level, where the dream version would be like, okay, so Gerald has lots of experience in Spanish and a bit of experience in Portuguese, but has never learned the Cyrillic alphabet. And he's a sort of 42-year-old farmer. And on the basis of all that data, we know that he's going to find the following joke really funny and never forget the Russian word for bus stop, Ostanovka. Whatever, Yeah, that's the dream, And I think,
Right.
it's something to be aspired to rather than something we do immediately.
Yeah. I guess you could even like A/B test individual speakers. Let's say if you and I recorded the same
Mhm.
phrase, you
Yep.
could send 50,000 people to your recording and 50,000 people to mine.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
and
oh,
if,
totally.
and if people learn the phrase better from you, you could
Mhm.
just say, well, we probably shouldn't have this guy then. We should
Yeah,
rather
yeah.
have Ed say it instead of Chris.
Yes, well, I think that's exactly what we will do. Although, I don't think we'll be too slave to the bell curve, so to speak.
Right.
We can, if we find someone extremely amusing, but completely incomprehensible, that might be a good experience for language learners to have.
Like,
Anyway,
yeah, you mentioned
yeah,
Liverpool before.
yeah, yeah.
It goes under that. So what other memory? Well, I keep talking about memory, but of course that's because you're the memory guy. You're the grandmaster of memory, and
Mhm.
Memrise is sort of built on the memory aspect. But what other sort of behind the scenes improvements towards retention rates and learning rates have you been doing in the last 1-2 years that people might not have seen because it happens behind the scene?
Well, I mean, there's lots of, there's 100 tiny little details really. A tweak to this algorithm, a subtle change to how we handle this interaction on a particular test type, a way we adapt to the difficulty of a word or to a person's particular strengths or weaknesses. I think it's one of those things which has, we still have a long way to go. I think there's the absolutely perfect form of this would be and this is what we're kind of trying to achieve, and I think we will get there. We'll get very close. But the dream version of this is something where we're kind of exactly anticipate. We're like the kind of perfect dance partner for your brain, where we're exactly anticipating, each of your mind's moves, where there are micro confusions, tiny little interactions between distant memories, moments of inattention, and so on. And we're just doing everything to make sure that the information is going into your brain in as sort of delightful a fashion as possible. And so that's the dream. And I think we've made a lot of progress, and we've got some quite exciting stuff coming up in the next year, which I think will move the needle quite a bit.
Great.
Yeah, one of the metrics we have is kind of speed of learning. Roughly speaking, measured in words per hour. And it's a complex metric because you have to say, well, you learn words per hour to remember for what period of time. But we've been doing this really cool competition with a bunch of cognitive science departments around the world, and it's called the Mem Prize. And we've actually got a URL for this, memprize.com. And basically, we approached it with University College London. There's some professors there, a guy called Professor David Shanks, who runs the Memory and Languages Lab at UCL. We approached 20 of the top cognitive science labs in the world, and we were like, well, you've been studying memory for 30 years, design your ultimate learning methodology. And so many of them did. So we got about 20 experiments which got done where people were like, well, I've been studying this element of memory, so I'm going to create a thing like this. And it was kind of to learn 80 Lithuanian words or something in an hour. And so they all ran experiments and then provided us with their kind of empirical results. And some of the experiments worked, some of them didn't, and some of the best ones improved the amount someone learned a week later from against the pure flashcards use case. They improved the rate from sort of 20 words per hour to like 44 or 50 words per hour. And by the way, we internally we think Memrise is at about 44.
Okay.
That's the kind of thing. Anyhow, and so we've taken these 5 top experiments and then we've coded them ourselves, and we're about to run this massive experiment to really gain some some like massive scale empirical data about these different approaches. And it's quite cool because what's interesting is that in cognitive science, although an incredible amount is known, and there are just so many unbelievably brilliant people coming up with super cool theories about lots of things, it's not really an empirical question like what's the fastest way to learn. It's more like, okay, if I add this mnemonic, what's the influence on long-term retention or whatever. I kind of compare it to like scientists have identified like lots of ingredients which help learning, but have never thought to cook up the ultimate recipe or something. Anyway, so we're going to run this thing, and then we'll see what happens. We'll see which entry wins, and then we hope to do this experiment every year for many, many years. And then because the results are all going to be open source, the people from the previous next year will be able to say, okay, these guys won this year, but that bit's stupid. We're going to add this thing and the rest of it, and hopefully it will create a kind of feedback effect, and we'll be able to like seriously advance the science of learning to a point which just doesn't exist at the moment. And that will be beneficial for us, of course, but it'll also be beneficial for every other learning startup and every school and so that'll be pretty cool.
Every learner.
Every learner, yeah. Yes.
Amazing. And also, speaking of new features, not too long ago you released, or at least I got access to, I know sometimes you do staggered releases, but I got access to the new functions of the app, which had the speed review, which I wanted to just mention, because in sort of if I just had to ignore everything else and look at the speed review as an independent unit, I would say that's kind of I'm too lazy to do the full extended review. Is there some form of truth to that, or why did you come up with a speed review first of all? Let's talk about that.
So I think the thing is with learning tech is that one's always balancing motivation and engagement. So motivation and learning effectiveness, and they don't always completely coincide. So for instance, there's lots of evidence and this is kind of in the kind of meta psychology or metacognition kind of area of psychology, where there's lots of evidence that that people radically misunderstand what's most effective for their learning. So if you kind of get someone to use one of two techniques, quite often the one which works like twice as well as the other one, they'll say, no, that one didn't work very well or whatever. Anyway, so there's always this kind of challenge in designing learning tech to make sure that it's as effective as possible, but also to kind of communicate that to the learner. Anyway, that's just a kind of general proviso to answer. But the kind of cognitive reason for having speed review is just that, like, speedy recall means that, you know, so memories have kind of have speeds, kind of thing, and you kind of notice this when you try and eat slowly. So if you have, like, get a fork full of food, and rather than going at your normal pace to your mouth, you actually slow it down by a factor of 2. It's actually really painful, and the rest of it. But you do that for a bit, and you can actually reset the pace at which that action memory works, kind of thing. And quite often you can get into a kind of pace of recall as well. So you have a certain speed at which you produce an answer, which sometimes may not be quite fast enough for conversation, because when you're talking, or you obviously have to have the capacity to find words exceptionally fast in order to be able to do it. Anyway, so, like, it's obviously a desirable facet of a memory that you can find it really fast. So that's kind of one thing. At the same time, like, people often on Memrise have thousands of items they've learned,
right,
where actually you fundamentally know those memories, and we could give you a typing test and you get it right, but that actually takes a bit of time and effort, the rest of it, and you can actually get pretty much the same benefit from just speedily recalling it. And so that's kind of one of the motivations, is to aid people who have a lot of memories to review. And I think the final reason is just a bit of fun. It's just like going
gamification
fast.
a little bit.
Gamification, yeah, fun is fun, and funny enough, my 70-year-old father, who rather hilariously was not, I mean, I've been doing Memrise for like 6 years or whatever. He wasn't using the Memrise app until we were made editor's choice on Google Play. And he was like, oh, Ed, your app's so good, I'm going to download it. So he downloaded it. He got into doing some Italian. And I saw him recently. And he was like, okay, so Ed, I can't talk. I've got to do my speed review. And I just watched over his shoulder, and it was crazy. He's 70 years old, and he was putting together strings of like 65. I mean, viewers, strict listeners who don't know the system, but I can't get to 65 myself. Yeah, it was quite interesting to see my old man just go, whatever, and just making these kind of speedy recall things, and and it's quite a bit of fun. So.
Yeah, it definitely is, and I guess one of the things you also just mentioned that is a big thing is the most efficient method to learn something might not be the most enjoyable or enjoyable at all, and then that defeats the entire purpose of effectiveness.
Yes, it's a balance, and I think actually at the heart of it there is a place you can find where you kind of combine perfect effectiveness with perfect enjoyableness. But the thing you've really got to optimize there is not like how fast are the memories being laid down over a 2-minute or 5-minute period, but just like how much will someone wind up learning after a year, kind of thing. And that's the thing you want to maximize, and that's the thing you want to. I mean, for me, like the moments in my life where I've had my most kind of impressive and enjoyable learning experiences have always been like 50% heart, 50% head. I've always felt like in my brain, I was like, oh my God, I'm a genius. I'm learning so fast. It's so cool. And then in my heart, I've been like, oh my God, it's so cool what we're learning. I'm learning, but I'm discovering new things. I love it. I want to learn more. I want to learn more. So that's the loop which we're kind of aiming to create. And it's not a job I imagine we're ever going to finish, but it's quite an enjoyable task to try and put it together.
I have no idea.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think a lot of people are jealous of your jobs of just playing around with the memory and all these things. One thing I was surprised, well, maybe not surprised, but when I've seen some of your other stuff on YouTube and some of the interviews you've done, you always talk a lot about the I'm not sure what it is, a memory palace, I suppose. The journey method where you kind of go through. You mentioned it when you were teaching people how to memorize a deck of cards. It always surprised me that method didn't have any sort of presence,
In Memrise.
yeah, it just doesn't
Yeah.
seem to be like a journey, or yeah, you have the mems, of course, being the associations, but
Yeah.
you don't have the sort of spatial relationship. Is that something that you've tried to implement or thought about implementing, or?
Yeah, we have certainly thought about implementing. I mean, I've spent years of my life daydreaming about the ideal way to do that. It's tricky. It's I mean, actually, well, we can come back to the Membus on this topic, because the courses we're going to create on that journey, I think we're going to integrate the actual sort of story and the journey into the courses, so that there is a kind of, to begin with, a narrative element, and secondarily, kind of spatial elements to kind of categories and so on. But the thing which memory palaces are most effective for are learning sequences.
Okay.
So like if you need to learn, so let's say that in order to speak a language, you needed to learn 1,000 words in order. We definitely do it in a memory palace.
Right.
And then you'd be able to recall. You'd literally be able to begin with the first word, and then it wouldn't take that long. You'd be able to study on it for like 10 hours, and you'd be able to begin with the first word and get all the way to the last word. But that's not really the required task, and actually very much in life. I mean, there's surprisingly little one actually has to remember in sequences. There's a small amount of biology. There's some arbitrary tasks like, oh yeah, and there's poetry, of course, is a big thing you have to learn in sequence. But actually, there's not that much in language which needs to be learned in sequence. So that's kind of part of the reason we haven't emphasized it too much. I do actually think that there are some really interesting possibilities, and I cannot wait for virtual reality tech
Oh yeah.
to hit the mainstream. I mean, this is a bit of a long-term one, but I think in about 3 years' time, when we've kind of completely nailed mobile stuff, maybe that will be like the next frontier, and there are just incredible opportunities for structuring knowledge around memory palaces. And the thing which is super interesting is that memory palaces are actually quite flawed in terms of their perfection, because you're always using like an arbitrary space. So I mean, for those viewers or whatever who don't understand how this works, you basically take a space like this room, for instance, and you have like a sequence of, say, 20 objects. And what you do is, rather than trying to remember them just as a string of verbal sounds, you actually attach them to the space in your imagination. So you say, okay, we'll begin with the postman here. So just imagine a postman here, and then over there we're going to have a ladder, and then and you go around. And it turns out that this is an exceptionally strong way of installing memories in your mind. No doubt it has some kind of fundamental evolutionary story behind it. So,
Right.
when we're good at space, mammal brains have been doing this for whatever, 200 million years. The brain's good at space. But the thing is that the actual space doesn't really encode any information other than the sequence, because it's just an arbitrary space. You're just saying, okay, the next thing along, and then okay, like. But there's a possibility with virtual reality that we can actually create spaces which themselves encode information. So the position of the door and the shape of the room and what happens when you walk out of the room and the next room's along and so on, each of those things could contain structured information. So rather than imagining things in the space, all you're doing is learning the space. And I've been thinking about this for years, and and so I used to do a thing called memory walks, where you take a bunch of people and you walk them around and you'd learn, say, all the prime ministers and all the presidents or whatever. But of course, if you actually had power over the space, you could actually make the space, reflect not just like the sequence of the presidents, but you actually have the president there, and you could also have their causal connections to the next president. And let's say there was a plague at that time, you could have an object which kind of signifies a plague and so on. And just literally by walking around the room, you could absorb the history. And in particular, I'd be super interested to build a school like this, an actual architectural space, where if you were studying 13th century history, you'd go to that point in the school and you do all the lesson there. So all the memories would be attached already meaningfully into the timeline.
But I suppose you could just have one room, because the virtual reality can just generate the room. So if you just have the space, just a big like gym room or something, the virtual reality system could actually just generate every reality based on what the subject.
Yeah, definitely. And there's a particular thing which I always think is very interesting, which is making connections between abstract concepts. Sometimes also with history. And this is like inherently a very challenging thing to remember. You know, when you're studying philosophy or some arcane area of cultural theory or whatever it is, just holding all the connections in your mind sometimes require months of study to sort of be, okay, I'm thinking about this concept, and of course that relates to this way of framing and understanding, you know, this. And this is kind of what you're doing when you're a student and you're getting used to a new area of study. But there's a possibility that you might be able to use memory palaces, which are kind of like three-dimensional diagrams, if you think about it.
Yeah.
Diagrams which you're walking around inside, and you can kind of look around at the rest of it. Might be to actually teach those kinds of complex concepts. Anyway, for the future. So, but yeah, I mean, I think just going back to Memrise, there's two things which I think we should hopefully make more of. I think that the video provides a certain sense of space. You know, you kind of remember not just the foreground, but the background. You have a sense of the space there. And this will help kind of contextualize and connect memories. And then hopefully through the road trip, you know, which I should talk about more in the Membus, hopefully through the road trip, we should be able to kind of create narratives within the courses.
Right, so it makes sense that you don't just have a sentence that says, John is going to the beach. You actually have... You knew the pre-story to that, or based on the memorized story. So you can, if you're unsure of a word, you can always just think back to the previous action, and then go from there.
Yeah, and at the very least, think back to the context, so we can sort of, I don't know. Have you ever seen a Snapchat story?
A Snapchat story? Well, I've been Snapchatted messages, but I haven't seen a story per se.
Yeah, because I personally find Snapchat very boring as a messaging platform. But they have this amazing thing where people can make their messages or the little snaps they do public, and they get kind of curatorially linked into a scene. And I saw one of these for Mecca, and it was just, you know, it was just a collection of whatever 5-second clips strung next to each other. But it was kind of looking at it from the inside, from every angle. You saw them drinking water, you saw them going down to pray, you saw their hotel accommodation, how they got there, you saw them chatting and eating and the rest of it. And it was just kind of like it was just like a sort of intimate documentary style portrait of all the stuff which actually happens if you go there, rather than just the normal iconic photo or whatever, which tells you nothing, or gives you a very misleading global impression of it. And I'd like the kind of Memrise courses in the future to have this kind of quality, where you know, going to the beach in France is quite different from going to the beach in Germany. It's quite different from the beach in Peru, you know, whatever. And to be able to capture the texture of these experiences with all the contextual phrases and all of the kind of quality would be pretty magnificent, and that would then mean that when you actually were in a beach in Peru or what have you, you kind of had the lingo, you kind of knew what goes on, you might be too surprised, you know, whatever, and in fact it might tempt you to go there in the first place, which would be even better.
That's nice too, yeah. One of the big discussions that has been going on for a while, and I haven't seen any new sort of studies released on this, is should you learn from a translation, or should you have the original target language only? And obviously Memrise works a lot on going from a language to another one. Is it English, obviously, the big one. Have you first of all, what's the benefits of doing one or the other? And also, now that you're starting to support video, will the model at some point have videos that don't have any text under them? Or
That's a very interesting idea. That's a very interesting idea. I mean, so you just be in sort of pure video mode, and you just have to work it out. And maybe the action you'd have to. It's always good to have people forced to interact, because that may actually then forces you to understand things rather than just let them fly by or what have you. Well, I mean, I think that obviously, in some sense, when you're learning a phrase or a word or what have you, there's some kind of connection going on. So, you know, you learn the word for a spoon, and you're kind of, you know, you've got to successfully connect the word to the thing in the world, or, you know, which might in fact be a pattern of behavior and so on. So in some sense, you're always doing some kind of mapping. And so the kind of question, I guess you could say, is like, do you map via a verbal connection to the concept you already have, or simply via some other source of connection to the concept, which might be like a visual image, yeah, I mean, I think it is obviously possible to learn merely through the images and stuff. I mean, mainly, I mean, it's of course the child is supposed to be the compelling others, yeah, and of course children are amazingly stupid and take ages to learn even the basics of language.
Yeah.
And they also have incredibly rich contextual information. Right? So I mean, I think it is a viable thing, and it obviously it has some sort of obvious advantages, like there's no recourse to something you're comfortable with, and you're kind of thrown in at the deep end.
Right.
The rest of it, you're just sort of thrown into just doing. But I think, certainly with kind of contemporary technology, I wouldn't be very, very excited about designing a system which went just straight to the language. But I think, if you can give people the experience of sufficiently rich contextual situations with sufficiently rich interactions, then it could be compelling. Like if you go to a foreign country where nobody speaks your language and you're just forced to pick it up, make sounds, and hope people respond to you like, the spoon. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. I was just thinking, if you let's say you had to learn the word for spoon, there would just be a picture of a spoon and and there would be maybe the word in the foreign language would be there, but it wouldn't say the English equivalent. So you'd have to map the translation to the image.
Yeah, I mean, but even the image is not it's not your internal conception. It's an external visual symbol of that thing. Yeah, I mean, and obviously, nouns are the easy thing to go through, but if you sort of think like, if you're trying to understand a phrase like "she walked elegantly" with a quizzical expression on her face,
right?
It's like, okay, well, maybe you can make a visual representation of "she walked elegantly," but when it comes to like, she would have bought him a nicer umbrella, but she decided that since he had no idea how to look after himself, she would instead just give him a birthday card. With that sort of thing, it's just like that's kind of an elaborate thing to form a visual image of.
Very long sentences on the new Memrise
Well,
courses.
not just long sentences, but things which refer to different modes and times and elements of reality which aren't directly visually represented, sort of thing. I mean, at one point I got quite into cognitive linguistics, which is a kind of area of the cognitive science of language acquisition and usage, which is it's just, I mean, it's full of geniuses, this discipline. This is amazing minds creating extraordinary diagrams to kind of often just to illustrate like why a preposition is used a certain way in French and not in English. So it's just like in French you might say like I drink in the cup rather than I drink from the cup. Anyway, there'll be enormous diagrams, sort of subtle fields of meaning interacting in all these different force schemas and stuff to explain that simple thing. And it's thrilling from an intellectual perspective, but it didn't provide any immediate opportunities for like, oh, that's a great way to teach that. Because, even if it's getting right to the core of what the meaning actually is, sometimes a kind of shortcut by just pure translation is just a bit easier.
Yeah, I suppose that's the thing.
Yeah. But having said all this, I mean, I have to say, I mean, I should add that I'm by no means an expert on what the possibilities are. We have an approach to the thing which we're kind of working on, but I certainly wouldn't rule out that some budding young thing could invent an experience which makes just a pure learn from the image really compelling.
Right. Well, the whole idea is flawed anyway, I suppose. As a learning as a child, people often, like you say, herald it as the best thing. But I always think it's very flawed argumentation, and as you say, it takes them years to even get to say a basic wrong sentence.
Yes, so it's also the case that they are simultaneously building up their entire conception of the world, from a level which is just right down to the basic sensory mode of space. So.
How do I stand up?
Yeah.
And they have like 1 or 2 full-time tutors all the time. I mean,
exactly. Yeah.
If you had a French tutor walk around you for 24 hours a day, every day, I'm sure you'd learn French very quickly.
Yeah, I mean, in order to try and achieve that, I've several times proposed to elegant Parisian ladies, but unfortunately without any positive results so far. So.
Didn't work. That's one experiment you still have to do.
Yeah. And I think even if the proposal had been successful, they probably wouldn't want to walk around in circles chatting in French anyhow. So.
All right. Well, I was talking about earlier if we could give the people some very practical and actionable tips and tricks
Mhm.
to how to improve their Memrise experience. And why don't we assume that I want to start a new language on Memrise, and I
Yeah.
find the best course, which is probably created by you, or you can see from the community popularity usually.
Mhm.
So I start my course, and what are the things that before I even click the first word or sentence, what do I need to know to maximize my results and
Yeah.
from there?
Well, I mean, I think the first thing is definitely to click the button. And I'm not entirely joking there. As in, the difficult bit is always the beginning, right? As in, and this is not just the first time you use it, but as a Memrise user, every day, you want to be using it as often as possible. And there's a kind of a neat little trick you can use. Let's say you find exercise a bit unpleasant. It's a very good idea just to sort of do one press up. And then having got down and bothered to do one press up, you kind of go, okay, well, I'll do 5 or whatever.
Right.
I'll do 20. It's a similar thing with learning. So just like getting really like choosing an amount to learn each day, which in its basic form doesn't add up to very much, is a really good idea. So on Memrise, you can set yourself a good daily goal. So you can say, okay, I'm going to make whatever, learn 1,000 points a day, so roughly 5 words a day, and getting into that rhythm is a really good idea. I think the second tip is to do with the use of mnemonics. So we have these things, mems, on the site, which are user-generated memory tips, which basically help you make the connection between a foreign word and your native language in your mind. And these are incredibly powerful if you use them. And sometimes they're not necessary, but it's a really good idea if you ever get a word wrong to kind of hold yourself up for 5 seconds and just to really think, okay, whether using a mem created by the community or in your own mind, just to explicitly make the connection, because memories are connections in your mind, and the vast majority of the time when you don't learn fast, it's because it's not because you forgot anything, it's because you just didn't really make the connection in the first place.
All right.
And having that kind of explicit moment where you consciously connect one thing to another in your mind is really powerful for learning. So that's another tip. And then I do recommend like adding a bunch of friends to your personal leaderboard, because there's something about banter around competitive learning which is deeply effective. And then what else? I think as I say, so setting the goal and making sure that it becomes a daily habit. Because if you think about it, you learn 10 words a day. It takes like 15 minutes to learn 10 words max.
Yeah.
You do that for a day, once a day for a year, and then you learn 3,650 words, and that's pretty comfortably enough to be able to understand anything you see in a newspaper or whatever else. And it's of course fairly addictive just to be learning that.
Right, and try to make sure to keep the reviews down every time, and just I guess follow the whatever it tells you to do. That's why you design it that way, right? So people don't have to think about when to review stuff themselves. It'll come up at a sort of a what does that, when does it come up actually? What is that defined by, the time it takes for it to request a new review?
So one of the features of Memrise is a system based on the concept of spaced repetition, which basically says, you've got a lot of memories in your brain. In fact, all of them are fading. That's the nature of human life, I'm afraid to say, but in actually quite a good way, because millions of things go into your mind every day, and most of them are complete nonsense. So you kind of want everything to be fading unless it's important. And the way, and the kind of hack the brain has for realizing when something's important is just to say, well, if it repeats, then it's actually a valuable pattern in the world. If it repeats, or if it's exceptionally interesting and dangerous or beautiful or sexy or what have you. Anyhow, so all memories are fading, and they fade at different rates. And one of the key things which determines how quickly a memory fades is basically how often you've seen it before, because each time you get a repetition, it fades slightly slower the next time. And so if I were to do, let's see if I can do this in a sort of gestural fashion, but if a memory goes into your head, it's immediately going, woo, and after about 5 minutes, you'll almost forgotten it. But if you remind yourself then, it'll go back up, and this time it'll fall slightly slower. So after about an hour, you'll be about to forget it. And do it again, and then it'll sort of last a day this time. It actually will be much more solid. And if you remind yourself in a day, well, actually this time it's going to take a month, and so on and so forth. And of course, it depends on the memory, it depends on who you are, and we try and track all these things. And so the Memrise system is basically it's like a guardian for your memory. So it tells you like, okay, you need to remember this one now, and this one now, and these 5 now, whatever. And it looks across your whole past learning history, even if you've been learning for years, and you've learned like, funny enough, a guy came into the office today, a guy called chap called Roberto, who's the first overlord I've ever met on Memrise. So he's got 100 million points, has learned more than 100,000 items. Anyway, he popped in, he's from Turin in Italy, and he was like, hey, I'm an overlord. And so we hung out. And so he has like, he has 100,000 things he's learned on Memrise. And every day we make a suggestion of the ones he should most review, and he goes through them. And that's how he can kind of keep that many items fresh in his memory.
He must have many reviews though every day.
Yeah, I think he's quite a devoted student to Memrise. Yeah, spent about 4 or 5 hours a day learning. Yeah,
that's impressive. Yeah, that's one of the problems I had when I was sort of really getting my head in, was that suddenly the reviews would just stack up, and I would miss a day, and I would have like 1,000 to review, even before adding new words, and I just crumbled. I don't know if there's any tricks or tips in that situation.
Well, I think in a way that's bad product design, and we have some, because what's important is to maximize your chances of remembering as many things as possible. And if we start showing you numbers like, okay, you've got 1,000 to review, that may be true. But probably if we showed you 500 or 200, and then just made sure you did it, then you'd end up learning more. So again, it's that example of effectiveness and motivation.
Right.
And good product design should probably have been a bit more encouraging. So I do apologize about that. And we do have some. We're doing quite a lot of data work on our spacing algorithm at the moment, because of course we've got millions of people who've learned tens of millions of words. So we have a lot of data, and we've got some quite interesting ideas about how we can improve that in the future, so that you don't find yourself up against a wall of review. So
right. Yeah, that's the problem. And then I suppose it's just keep using it every day or as regularly as possible, and just keep the reviews down and add new words. And I guess the balance of adding new words is just to make sure not to add like 100 words in one day and then no words for 2 months. You want to spread it out, right?
You do. That's actually that would be another tip for Memrise users, is like little and often. And this has been a established principle of effective memorization since early antiquity. So in the early classical Greek texts. Oh, by the way, I must come back to the word. I had this thought today because Marie has been talking about the Membus tour being epic.
Oh yeah, that's true. Yeah.
And then I suddenly remembered today that the word epic comes from the Greek word epos, which means word. It suddenly struck me what an appropriate thing to call our Membus road trip epic, because we will be, in fact, epically collecting hundreds of thousands of words.
Yeah, it's crazy for 11 languages if the Kickstarter is successful. And just a reminder to everyone, you can still get involved for a couple of days on the Kickstarter page. Just go search for Membus. You'll find the Kickstarter page. You can get involved at various levels, and you can even join. You can get on the bus. You can actually be a part of the bus. I mean, how cool is that? And Ben, the COO of Memrise, has promised me a seat if I can find 2 others. So 2 will pay for my seat if that works out.
Oh, great!
And, so if anyone's listening out there and like, I want to get on the bus, remember to say Chris sent you, and we'll have the most epic road trip ever. Also did sort of on a whim say that if you make the 100K a goal in your Kickstarter and somebody gets me on the bus, I'll get a decently sized tattoo of Memrise somewhere.
That's very good.
That's all in.
Oh, that's going good. Well, I appreciate your devotion to the brand, and we'll do our best to make sure it happens. We've still got about 40K to go, so you don't need to worry too much right now. Yeah.
Right, exactly. But thank you so much for coming on, Ed, and sharing your love for memory and Memrise. And we can't wait to see the new features. I've seen some demos of the new video function on Memrise, and it looks fantastic. I hope my data plan doesn't get swallowed up on the first day. But
you know what? It won't actually. Our incredibly clever engineers have somehow managed to compress and serve the video in super small things. So it's actually hardly more than a picture. So it'll be like browsing Instagram. It'll be fine. Yeah.
Amazing. All right. Well, thank you so much, and I'm really looking forward to the Membus tour. And
We'll can't wait to see you on the bus. Yeah.
I hope so. Otherwise, I'll just smoke the bus through Europe and run behind it or something.
Superb. Brilliant. Just come meet us on the way. Okay. Have a great day.
Thank you so much.
See you.
Bye.
Yeah. Bye.
I still remember it. It's a very vivid memory. I remember asking my mom, what are they saying? Why can't I understand them? And she explained to me that they're speaking another language, and I don't recall if she knew that it was Japanese or not. But anyway, it turned out that this boy, Yutaka, was in my class at school. And I just, from day one, was obsessed with him. I had to sit next to him every time we were, in a circle, and I became his best friend. And our teacher kind of assigned me to be his helper and help him learn English because he didn't speak any English. But I was less interested in helping him learn English. I wanted to know what he was saying in Japanese, and